to the ABC Podcast.
Always be cool.
The show where your hosts, DC and BK, showcase your local business and real estate pros going gangbusters in leadership, community involvement, and just being cool.
Here are your hosts, serial entrepreneurs, mortgage experts at Summit Lending, and partners in crime, Darren Copeland and Bobby Kerr.
All right, everybody, it's the Always Be Cool podcast, hanging out with your hosts, Bobby Kerr, Darren Copeland.
What's up, everyone?
Man, we are jacked up today for someone that is a little bit different than some of our other guests, but someone who's been writing for 40 years in the Kansas City area, personally written stories about DC and I in high school.
How about that?
Right? And in our musical ventures later on in life. But without further ado, Mr. Bill Althaus.
All right, everyone, here we go. 1972 graduate of Truman High School. His senior year, they were voted top high school newspaper in the entire country. Award-winning sports writer for the Examiner for over 41 years, has won 12 Missouri Press Association awards for his columns. He was a Kansas City Royals beat writer for 21 years. He is a lifetime member of the Baseball Writers Association. He also hosts a Sonic Locker Room radio program that highlights 18 area high schools. Bill has written several books covering the Royals and the Chiefs. All around awesome guy. Bill Althaus, welcome to the show.
Guys, thank you.
Right?
Just like I wrote it for you.
I know, right?
All right. All the highlights.
Exactly.
That's great.
Go Truman High School.
Yeah,
Throw it out
Had to
there.
get it out there.
Go Patriots.
Oh, my gosh.
Amazing.
Speaking of, I think we were talking out there about when you graduated from Truman High School. I think my uncle might have graduated the same year. I just texted him to confirm. So I'm going to wait to tell you his name to see if you might know him. But
500 in our graduating class. It's funny because I'm at an age now that I not only have dads that I covered and now cover their children.
Yeah.
I had a grandpa and a grandson, and I'm like, dude, you're making me so. Isaac Woodward at Fort Osage High School, your grandpa made me feel really old.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we were actually talking in the hall, and I brought up one of my old coaches from American Legion, and it turns out he was one of your very first interviews. Is that right?
The first.
That is
I
crazy.
was writing. I was a junior at Truman, and looking for a little extra money. There was a newspaper in Independence called the Independence Observer, and Don Riley had won the first American Legion state championship with Post 21, and just a flood of memories. Those teams, my friends played for Don Riley. I followed that team. And his wife, Millie, who I love dearly, helped my wife get her first job in the medical field. So, that happens 5 minutes into our conversation.
That's just such a small world because, my wife calls it the Independence and Truman effect.
Yes.
She goes, wherever you go, you guys know. And same thing with Blue Spring South with Bobby.
Sure. Yes.
Like, it's just such a close-knit community that, again, it's not even 7 degrees of separation. It's more like 1 or 2.
I know. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I think as people are going to be listening to this, they're going to be like, okay, cool. Yeah, I've seen Bill's name. I've seen that he's written for the Examiner for 4 decades.
Right.
I wonder why, they asked him to be on the ABC show. And I think it's really, really cool because, first of all, you have had a history of a run in your profession in a community that is very tight-knit.
Yes.
And I would imagine, and you don't have to talk about it, but I would imagine, just like athletes, you've had other opportunities to go elsewhere, to use your gifts and your talents. And there's been something about Eastern Jackson County and Kansas City that's kept you nearby. So maybe before we get into the really cool stuff, talk a little bit about why you've stayed here, what it is you love about Kansas City and the Examiner, and just really what makes your job so awesome.
When I became a sports writer at the Examiner, all I did was cover pro sports.
Okay.
And that has changed dramatically because the main thing I cover now, high school
yeah.
Yep.
and then the Kansas City Mavericks and Kansas City Comets, the hockey and soccer teams in Independence. I traveled with the Royals, went to spring training, and I was the same age as those guys.
Right.
And they were in my wedding. I was in their wedding.
Oh, you're kidding.
Wow.
They would get me the best house at spring training at the player prices, and lifelong friendships.
That's amazing.
And oh my gosh,
Wow.
I treasure those days. When the Yankees would come to town with the Royals and
like late
Reggie-
80s or
Reggie
late
Jefferson,
70s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
public enemy number one. And when we finally beat the Yankees and went to the World Series, and that crazy, oh my God, I'll never forget the parade, George. A little bit 2 sheets to the wind,
No.
riding that
Two?
horse.
Don't believe
Only
that. No, rumors.
Riding that horse and all the confetti that was thrown down there, and those memories I'll treasure forever.
Yeah.
And I could basically write my own ticket with whatever I wanted to cover. I didn't have to be pigeonholed any place.
Right.
And I have grown to love high school sports. People ask me all the time, how do you have so many friends who are 20, 30, 40 years younger than you are? And it's because they were kids I covered in high school.
Right.
And we hit it off. And, we're still friends. And a coach will tell you there's no better memory, there's no better moment for him than when a former athlete comes in and says, Coach, how you doing?
Right.
There's no better moment for me than when I get a graduation invitation. When a kid is in town for a weekend and he calls and says, do you have time for lunch? And
Or when a couple guys from 20 and 30 years ago
there you go,
had stuff
buddy.
written about them and they asked you to be on their podcast.
Right. That's it. And I do have to admit, my wife said, get a picture of all of you because I want a picture of Bobby.
Oh, there we go. There we
She
go.
still likes that Bon Jovi act,
There
buddy.
you
That
go.
was a great night. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's the memories.
Yeah.
And I'm not a rich guy. Never will be a rich guy. But I'm rich with friends. I'm rich.
Your
with
heart is
memories.
full.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, yes, my
Yeah.
heart is full.
Your experiences and just the things you've been around and having players in your wedding,
Yeah.
being around spring training.
Wow.
I mean, that's a lot of man envy from Bobby and I right now. 'Cause that would be
That's a good way
that
to
would be
put it.
amazing.
Oh, my favorite spring training story. My son Zach is 3 years old. We go to see the Royals play the Cincinnati Reds. I think it was in Lakeland. And George would play 3 innings and then he'd leave. And my wife and I are there and he sees us. He says, hey, Zach, come on down. Come on down, Zach. George was a good, we aren't as close as we were because, for the 20 years he played, I saw him every day.
Sure. Yeah.
And he and Zach hops over the fence, and he and George are walking out. The locker room was out in left field, and so I make my way down there, and they've got the old time trays of chicken and different. It's not like what they're serving in the
Sure.
in the Crown Club at Kauffman Stadium. So he gives Zach a chicken leg. Zach sticks this whole thing in his mouth. Pulls it out. There's no meat on it. He grabs George's hand and spits it in his hand. I'm like, okay, Zach. If George and I are still friends after that, so,
Yeah,
those are the things I can't tell you the score of any game, with the exception of a few.
Sure.
But, man, the memories like that are amazing.
That would be amazing. And that's when they were still down in Florida, right?
Yes.
That's before
Yes.
they went to Surprise.
When they were in, started out in Fort Myers,
Right.
and then went to Baseball City,
Baseball
to Haines
City.
City. Just, Baseball City, I don't know if they realized they were like 15 miles from Orlando.
Right.
And I'm sorry if I can go to Orlando or if I can, because they had, little Ferris wheels and things like that around
Sure.
it. And it just never worked. But boy, it was fun to go down there for a baseball.
Oh, I'm
game.
sure.
Oh
I'm
my
sure.
gosh.
Yeah.
So taking a step back, let's go back to high school a little bit. So
Sure.
like at what point, were you at Truman, or what point as a young man did it kind of click with you that, hey, I really want to write for a living. I want to cover sports. This is really my passion. When did that come about?
I didn't even know what journalism was when I went to Truman. As a freshman, I went to Palmer Junior High
Yeah.
School.
Oh, yeah.
And then went to Truman as a sophomore. And, I had this guy called a counselor. He asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I love to write and I love sports. He says, well, we have the greatest high school journalism teacher in the country, Ron Clemens. And Talk about Ron here in a
remember
little
him?
bit.
He was still there when I was
Wow.
there.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, I have regained my friendship with Ron. He had season tickets to the Mavericks and the Comets, and I saw him and his late wife Molly there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, that's got to be Ron Clements. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. And now, you know, I always go and say hi to him before the games and things. But as a junior, you took a journalism class to see, you know, if it's what you wanted to do. And the first thing he said, you have to meet a deadline. And I'm like, oh my God, a deadline? What the
What's
hell
that?
is that? And we put out a paper every 2 weeks. I write 3 stories a day now, and they got to be done by 11 o'clock.
Right.
So that deadline thing, I'm glad I found out about it back then. But and the paper won the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award. Cindy Wilkerson, our editor, and Ron Clements went to Washington, received the award from Eunice Shepard Kennedy. He looked around and through somehow going and taking the ACT on the right day. Got a full ride to Northwest Missouri State. And as a freshman, I was their sports editor, which was very intimidating. Also, broadcast football, basketball, and baseball. And this is long, long before they were good.
Right.
Oh, my goodness. Now, you know, I don't know how good Truman was when you were there. But my senior year, when I'm sports editor of the paper, 3 football wins, 4 basketball wins, and 6 baseball wins. So I knew every single
juggernaut.
game there. Oh, listen.
It was tough.
The football, I think every game I covered was the other team's homecoming game
Oh,
because
my
they
God.
knew they were going to get a big win.
Is that your next book? Truman High School, The Lean Years?
Yes, absolutely. So,
well, we did happen to make it. 1990, we went to state under Coach Berlin. I don't know if you remember Coach Berlin. So we
Rick Berlin, of course.
Yeah, we made it to the Final Four, went to Columbia. We thought we were big stuff, right? Bus down to Columbia, spent the night, got meal money.
Big deal.
Meal money. Oh, listen.
Yeah.
You know, well, you know, Pete Heil and the girls basketball team went to the Final Four back-to-back years. The same 2 years Steve Broughton and the boys made it to the Final Four 2 times.
Heck yeah.
And the greatest, without a doubt, the greatest high school, not boy or girl, but high school basketball player I've ever covered is Grace Slaughter, young lady who's out at Green Valley. She was on back-to-back-to-back U12, U14, U16 United States teams that played on the world level.
Wow.
She, as a freshman, declared to go to MU because that was always her dream. And her mom was the point guard for Pete Heil, Becky Cianciolo.
That's cool.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Another one of those things. I'm in the hospitality room before a tournament at Green Valley, and this woman looks at me and she goes, "Are you Bill Althaus?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I know you from somewhere." Now I got to give it to Becky a little bit. When she played at Truman, she had the hair.
Right.
Pete Heil told me one time, he goes, "If anybody ever lights a match in our locker room, it's going to blow up with all the
Just the
hairspray."
Aquanet.
The Aquanet.
Straight
You got
Aquanet.
it, dude. Yeah. So, yeah, it's been a great
That's
journey.
awesome. So let's, this is going to be a great experience because you're just an encyclopedia of personal stories with so many people in this town that everyone knows, right? So a lot of those, I'm sure, are very close to the vest because those are special things, as they should be. So our Kansas City Chiefs getting ready to go to the Super Bowl,
Right.
already down in Phoenix.
I know it.
Awesome, right? Now, everyone knows that I'm obviously a Dolphins guy, right? But I root for the Chiefs.
Yep.
We've even got some red mood lighting behind us today.
I like that.
So maybe we jump into some, like, it doesn't have to be like the climax, but like this season, think of other memorable seasons. We've had some great Kansas City Chiefs guys on the pod. We've had Drawn Cherry, Trent Green, JJ Burden, Carl,
JJ.
he's amazing, right?
Is he not the coolest guy ever?
Oh, just a sweetheart of a guy.
A great JJ Burden story.
Yeah, let's go there.
The years that, the Chiefs hadn't won a playoff game forever.
Right.
And they're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Joe Montana.
I was at that
Chiefs
game.
quarterback.
In the You're talking about playoff game?
Yeah.
I was at that
Yep,
game.
yep.
Yep.
So I've written about this, so I know JJ won't care. But he says I'm in the huddle and I'm like hyperventilating, and he says Joe looks at me and he goes, "Hey man," he said, "these are the moments we live for. This this is why you play. You know, the famous Montana story about the drive against Cincinnati when they were favored to win by 2 touchdowns, and they scored that late touchdown to win the game. And Montana goes, "Oh, there's John Candy over in the stands." You know, I mean, it's
just all nonchalant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey.
And JJ was the featured receiver on that play. You know, they have the hot receiver, and then they have the other guys if the hot receiver's not open. He threw the game-winning touchdown in overtime to Willie Davis, and Willie Davis was the 4th read.
Wow.
And no one on earth could have
Just
watched that
all
game
through his
and not-
progressions.
Through the progressions, and boom.
Wow.
And JJ said it's the greatest thing he'd ever been a part of.
JJ is an amazing human. He's had a great career after football for
absolutely.
motivational speaking.
Yes.
I know you're very active on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. Do you follow him?
I do.
Yeah,
In fact,
so-
I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, awesome.
About all the postseason stuff
Yeah.
and how excited he was.
He
about
he
it.
hit me up this morning on Twitter, actually,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
said something to me. So
Great guy.
Well, and it's got to be really exciting for those guys, you know, not having all those playoff wins back in the day, because
Yes.
actually my wife and I, we were just talking about this the other day, you know, we have a fan base right now that we've been on such an epic run.
Oh my God.
The last, I mean,
You're talking dynasty stuff.
all day long. I mean, hosting 5 AFC championship
Oh my
games,
God.
unheard of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just shows you how big of a difference is having, that franchise quarterback.
Absolutely.
versus the 80s.
Right.
Oh
And then,
my
we
God.
went through those periods of, the Schottenheimer era in the 90s and the early 2000s where, a lot of times we'd be 13-3, have home field advantage throughout, and then we would just drop an egg the very first game.
And it was
So-
always to an Elway.
Yes.
Manning.
Yes.
You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't put Jim Harbaugh in that class, but Harbaugh had the greatest game, and Lynn Elliott couldn't hit a field goal. So,
Right.
that was another one of those 13-3 seasons.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're living the dream right
Oh,
now.
my gosh, yes. We
Yes,
will
it's-
never have another athlete in Kansas City like Patrick Mahomes in my lifespan.
Special, yeah.
This guy, it's unreal.
And to be liked also and revered.
Yes,
Right.
And that's most of the times it's one or the other.
absolutely.
Great athlete,
Absolutely.
but kind of a questionable human.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, I don't know Patrick, so I can't.
He just checks the box.
But he checks the box of being a
Absolutely.
good human.
Yeah.
One of my wife's best friends, her nephew works for the Chiefs and is involved with a lot of events and things with Patrick. And he goes, you never have to worry about him being late. You never have to worry about anything.
professional.
He's a professional.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Now, and you've covered some, amazing athletes here in Kansas City. So maybe share, some stories that you can.
Sure.
Who were some of the, whether it's a Royal or Chief, but who were just some of the athletes that you covered over the years that were just such next level athletes that it was just a joy to watch them at the park?
Well, George Brett.
I don't even think Darren finished the question before that name came out of your mouth. Yeah.
That was
no question.
every day watching George Brett from 76 to 85 was like Christmas for me.
Wow.
You never knew what he was going to do, how he was going to pull out a win. The playoff game where he had 2 home runs through the potential tying run out at the plate from third base.
That's the Blue Jays, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's the Blue Jays. And they're down 3-1 in that series. Then they're down 3-1
Yeah,
in the
right.
World
Oh,
Series.
yeah.
George just had a way to will the team to win. 2 of the most famous home runs in the history of baseball. Pine Tar game, and certainly in the Midwest, anyone who followed the Royals, the homer off Gossage to get him into that first World Series.
Yep.
And George, man, he was a man of the people.
Mm-hmm.
He would take all the clubhouse kids and just take them all out to eat, pile them in his car. One of them now is like a chief of police. One of them was the president of the T-Bones. I mean, these kids have grown up to be great people. And back when Huey Lewis was the biggest thing in the world.
Yes.
Huey Lewis in the news.
The news, George got us all tickets and went in this backstage door, and we went back, and here's all the guys in the news and Huey Lewis and just me and my wife and the clubhouse kids and Joe Zeb. And we're just, they're just, and one of the guys in the group was a huge baseball fan. I don't remember his name, but he was the drummer. And the next day he came over to my house. just to talk baseball. Yeah, they were going to be in Kansas City a few days, and George treated those kids gave them all nicknames, and to this day they still have those nicknames.
I want a nickname from George Brett.
There you go. Yeah,
Because that's when you know you made it.
He calls me Bon Jovi, and I'm like,
It's
all
close
right.
enough. It's close enough. But these are the stories we love to hear, because some people might have a persona or an image of George Brett, but he's a guy's guy.
He is.
Right?
And I was with him so many times during that period, going out to eat, or, he would close down Dos Hombres in Brookside.
He loves his Mexican food.
Yes, and his best friend owned it. And Stace, my wife, and I, this was back when she really enjoyed going to the games because she knew everybody too. Because like I say, George
Every
and
day.
I are both the exact same age, just a couple of months apart. So, we would go over there and you would see, you're taking a bite to eat and somebody stuffs a baseball in front of your face. And, and I'm not an apologist for George, but he handled himself beautifully, but he's really lucky he wasn't in the day of
social media.
Yeah, because there'd have been a lot of crazy stuff that people could have used against him that wouldn't have been fair.
Yeah,
right.
We've talked about that. We've had that conversation of how difficult that would be to live your life like that.
Under the microscope. I mean, there's cameras literally everywhere these days recording. So,
absolutely. Well, Morgana, the Kissing Bandit, was in Kansas City. And gets George. Well, the next night, he jumps on the stage at a gentleman's club in Kansas City and kisses her.
He told us that story.
I was there.
You were
okay,
corroborated story.
Go ahead, Bill.
Tell your version.
Go ahead.
No,
just
and I mean, it was awesome. He just, I don't know if it was arranged because he would never say.
Yeah.
But, he's down there with all the guys on the team that he knew, and he jumps on stage and gives her a big
amazing.
kiss, and then boom.
Well, he was a bachelor for a very, very long time, right?
Yeah,
and so
he was a bachelor.
I'm pretty sure he told us that because he was on the pod.
Yeah. Oh,
and
I know.
So, and God bless him, he sat in this room for 2 hours.
Oh, yeah.
The longest interview we've ever done has been George Brett. And he could have kept
going. In fact, he was, towards the end, he was actually dialing up buddies saying, you need to be on this. So he called Willie Aikens live and said, Willie, what are you doing? You need to be on this podcast. And Willie's like, okay.
So we scheduled Willie.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because Willie spoke at my church about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't realize, when he played for the Royals, he had a bad stutter. And I mean, it was very, and boy, he's a great speaker now. And
he really is.
He spoke for an hour, just boom, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, his message is very, very powerful. And we always promote everyone that's on the show. But if you have not had a chance and you're listening to this, his movie's on Amazon Prime called The Royal,
it's a really good movie.
About Willie's story of drug addiction and loss and overcoming adversity and to get back in the situation that he's in. I think it's also important to say that there are people in our lives that help us get to certain spots. Yes. And to come full circle here as we talk about Willie Aikens, he says out loud how much he owes to George Brett.
I know. And Cal Rip.
And Cal
yep.
I don't remember the Cal. Is there?
Cal was very much involved in that.
Really?
In trying to get the early release from prison.
Oh, wow.
And because George and Cal were really good
right.
friends.
Yeah.
I mean, even I think he mentioned Dayton, as being an integral role of Dayton bringing him back into the organization. And so,
and wasn't it Hal McRae that really helped him out quite a bit when he was a player as well? Yeah.
Now, I tell you what, you mentioned Hal.
All right.
George was the face of the Royals. George was the greatest player in the Hal McRae was the leader of that team.
And guess who's the first person who will say that?
George.
And he did. Right. He said it right here on this podcast.
Pete Rose taught Hal McRae how to play baseball. Hal McRae taught George Brett how to play baseball. And man, when I was looking at social media the other day, and the famous play where Hal takes out Willie Randolph at second base during the playoffs.
Yeah.
There's one of him in the World Series when he's with the Reds taking out Dick Green.
No kidding.
And I mean, Green just laying there, and it was that same barrel roll into him.
What was the one where he's like 10 feet past second base?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
That was allowed.
Two rules in baseball that have been named: the Bob Gibson rule for lowering the base after he had that monster year,
right,
and then the Hal McRae rule where you can't go out of the base path.
Yep.
You know,
right.
If Willie Randolph was 8 feet from the bag, he
was going to take him out.
Oh,
he's taking
Hal was amazing.
So let's stick on Hal, because Hal was one of my favorite players growing up in the mid '80s. So, and clearly, he was managed the Royals for a little while. And unfortunately, we had that strike season in 1994. And many people believe, that we would have made the playoffs, including we had, actually 94. We had Monty on the program, and Monty said that was a really, really good team. So what good stuff do you have on Hal McRae that you can share with the listeners?
Little Jim, his tirade was voted the greatest tirade in the history of any sport.
When he was the manager,
when
you mean?
He was the manager of the Royals.
So for the people that may not know that story,
okay.
I want you to give a little bit of a preface here.
Very, very tough loss. Hal could still be managing the Royals, but he didn't like putting up with all the BS with the media.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, he couldn't have survived a game with now the way they walk him in and they have the backdrop and the orchestrated questions early on and all that.
Right.
We just went in Hal's office and chatted with him, and somebody asked him a question that set him off. And he picked up my tape recorder and threw it through the ceiling.
That was your tape recorder?
My tape recorder. And
That's
I still
amazing.
have that tape recorder.
Is it all dented up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This is awesome.
I at that time, I did the pre- and post-game show for WDAF. So the guy I worked for has the tape. But I have the
you
tape
have the recorder.
And Hal came up to me the next day, and he always called me Althauser. He goes, Althauser, get over here.
Althauser.
He said, I heard that was your tape recorder I tossed. He said, you go out and get the most expensive blank and tape recorder you can find, and you just bring me the bill.
Oh,
and
how awesome is that?
I didn't, because the station took care. But that was Hal. I mean, Hal, man, if he liked you, he liked you.
Yeah, just a class act.
Oh,
cool.
he was. I'm just so glad that he was on that World Series team, because it was more games in the National League, so they didn't have the DH, so now Hal didn't get to play in it.
Right.
But he was the only guy that would challenge Bo Jackson.
No kidding.
Bo had some injuries,
Yeah.
and so Hal gets in the cart where they throw all the dirty towels and things.
Yes.
Did George tell?
Yeah,
this?
tell it again, though.
Because George sat here. There was an empty locker, and Hal sat here. And I would get there at 2:30, pull up a chair, and just listen to George and Hal and these guys talk.
Living the dream, man.
Yeah,
Just literally sitting there in the clubhouse.
I mean, and now it's like a 40-minute window where you can talk to players, and
Sure.
like I say, it's that was 1976 to 85, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So Bo comes in and he's hurt, and Hal pops out of this and acts like he has a gun. I think he had a broom. He goes, Jackson, you're no good to us. Boom, boom, boom. Because Bo was
slumping,
so that was Hal McRae.
Yeah,
That's good
George
stuff.
did tell us, or George did. I think it was George that said that. Or
it was.
Yeah.
It was. Hey, Bill, do you happen to remember what was the question that set Hal off in that?
I think it was about a relief pitcher or something where John Doolittle, longtime area radio guy, asked the question. And I think if it would have happened 9 times out of 10 times, nothing would have, but it was just a bad night.
Yeah.
And it was almost like he was questioning Hal's knowledge of baseball.
Okay.
And, you don't do that. I really enjoyed being around Ned Yost, because he wouldn't let guys get away with that either. It was on the stage, it was orchestrated and all that. But man, if Ned didn't like a question, he'd let you know.
He would know.
Yeah.
He would know. And I'm sure that happens, being a reporter or something. I'm sure there's probably some times that there's guys that you really jive with.
Yes.
And maybe there's an athlete that, for whatever reason, that you don't jive with.
Oh, Bo Jackson. He was very intimidating. And I got asked to write a story on him in one of the hunting and fishing magazines, and oh my God, we were best friends. When I was doing that.
Yeah.
He's telling me about shooting a 300-pound buck back in the muck and mire in these woods, and put it on his shoulders and carried it out in mud. And I'm
Of course he did.
Of course you did, Bo.
I'm not going to question that, Bo. I know you did.
Oh, no.
Right.
Said the only time in his life he's ever been scared, he went scuba diving, and he's diving, and a shark comes right at him. And he goes, I had no place to go. And I'm like, okay, it's
Right.
me or
Wow.
you.
If there was anybody that could
Right.
punch that shark in
Exactly.
the nose, though, and tell it whose
It'd be
boss
Bo.
says it was Bo.
Exactly.
It'd be, but would you say Bo was one of the more gifted athletes that you saw?
If he'd have just played baseball, he'd have been a Hall of Fame baseball player. If he'd have just
Really?
played
Wow.
football, he'd have been a Hall of Fame football player.
If he would just pick
He
one or
was-
the other.
He was unbelievable.
You know, it's a great point. But would the legend
Well,
of Bo be what it is
Sure.
if he'd only played one?
absolutely.
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, how many times have you seen him scale that wall after catching
Oh,
it?
my gosh.
How many times have you seen him throw out Harold Reynolds,
Yep.
stolen base king? in
Harold
the
Reynolds
American-
still
Right.
talks about
I know
it.
it. Yeah, it's probably the highlight of his career.
It is.
Being
Seriously,
thrown out
it
by Bo
is.
Jackson. The home run with Ronald Reagan calling the game with Vince Scully in the All-Star
Yeah.
game.
Oh, that's right.
You know,
off Rick
it just
Russell,
goes
wasn't it?
on
Yeah.
and on and on.
Storybook stuff.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
he would hit monster shot home runs on accident,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it was just
like
pure
flick of the
athletic-
wrist.
Yeah, just
Well,
pure
back,
athletic.
before they did the reconfiguration of the stadium, Paul Splittorff used to talk about this, and he goes, I can't imagine being the guy that threw that pitch because it was a rainy day and they had grass out there, and that ball just stuck in the grass. So
it's
every
like a
time
golf
he got-
ball.
I threw the pitch that Bo hit almost a Buckner. You know, I mean, it was crazy.
That's amazing. So we're talking about all these cool stories, these great moments that you've had and experienced. I bet not every experience has been positive.
No.
And there have been some opportunities or some events that it was like, man, I don't know if this is worth it, or man, that guy is a real jerk.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about some hurdles that you've overcome in this position, and or maybe some negative feedback that you've got.
Sure. Yeah, well, when I started, I still can't type very well. Type with all the fingers on my left hand and just my index finger. My wife looks at me and she goes, "You're an idiot. Learn how to type."
Did you do that when you still were on typewriters too?
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
4 and 1.
Yep.
Wow.
So I used to write my stories longhand. Then I would type them, and then they would, this was so long ago, they would take it and lay down the type print
Oh,
manual.
wow. Yeah.
And at Truman, it was right next door when Hallmark was there, where a car dealership is.
That's right.
That was my grandfather's car dealership.
Was it really?
The Lincoln Mercury dealership.
Yeah,
Fred
yeah.
Smith Lincoln Mercury. That's my
it.
grandfather.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, small world again.
Again, it's independence.
But when I was young, it was intimidating to walk in, and there's Al Kaline, there's Harmon Killebrew. But then you'd find out, they were great. There were some really surly players, and you just stayed away from them.
Sure.
But I was talking to a player on the Comets, talking to his wife after the game Saturday, and they had a big come from behind win, and the guys, you could hear them kind of having some fun in the locker room, and she's there with this newborn baby, and I said, I want to tell you a story. I said, I've been a sports writer 40 years, and I figured it up one time that I have spent like 3 years of my life waiting outside of locker rooms.
Wow.
It's,
Yeah.
just the waiting game.
Uh-huh.
And, I hate to be late. I mean, I'll go out of my way to make sure I'm early, 10, 15 minutes early, unless that damn train goes through Grain Valley and stops me
Like we've all been stopped there
happened
before.
last week. So, but that's kind of a negative thing. And, it can't last forever. I mean, these kids that are playing now could be my grandkids. And that bond is gone, that closeness. But, maintaining the friendship with the guys. First friend I ever had who died was Dan Quisenberry.
Oh, wow.
And Dan was the funniest human being I've ever
Really?
met.
I've heard that. Was he a prankster or just
Oh
an
my
all-around
God, he was a
jokester?
prank. They had in 1980, they had a guy in the team named Rennie Martin.
Yeah.
And
pitcher.
Rennie and Dan
Or
lockered
afterwards,
next to each other. And then right across from them was Amos Otis and Paul Splittorff.
Hey, it was hilarious.
Oh my God. It was just like going to a comedy club. If I wasn't over with George and Hal, I was over watching those guys. And Dan's talking to Rennie one time, and he calls me over and he goes, Bill, how most pitchers throw to spots? Rennie throws to continents.
Continent.
You know, I mean, it was they just were always getting on somebody. Splittorf was hilarious. You know, Steve Busby's probably the greatest competitor I've ever been around, even though it was for such a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
He had a grand slam. And Busby had a grand
Did
slam.
he really?
But it didn't count.
Oh.
Because the umpire heard somebody yell from the dugout and called timeout right before the pitch and went over.
Oh,
well,
no.
It was Splittorf, but Splittorf never told no one. They all knew Busby would have killed him. He'd have taken a bat to him after the game.
Really?
Everyone in the dugout
In
knew.
the dugout, like,
but they all just
we got you.
mum's the word.
So Split was just messing around and
Yeah.
said timeout.
Yeah.
And he jacks one.
Yeah, and he jacks a grand slam. So,
Yep.
you know, those are the stories. You know,
Yeah.
I don't remember who they were playing. I don't remember the score of that game, but I'll
Right.
never forget that story.
So
Wow.
let's stay on Dan Quisenberry because that's a name that doesn't come up nearly as much
He
as
should
what
be
it
in the
should.
Hall of Fame.
Right?
Yeah. For
So-
7 years, he was the best pitcher in baseball.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Was he just unhittable? Because you know a lot of the listeners didn't see Quisenberry pitch in the early '80s.
Look at a
late
picture
70s.
of Dan Quisenberry, and I promise you had a high school biology teacher that looked like Dan Quisenberry.
Just the glasses
the
and
glasses, the
Yeah,
big mustache.
Yeah.
You know, he was an underhander like Trent DeColby,
Yeah.
who came
Yeah.
after him, and people may be more aware of him. His favorite pitch was the Peggy Lee pitch.
What's that?
Is that all there is? That was her big song.
Yeah.
And Quiz is like, you know, Reggie Jackson once struck out against him and just MF'd him all the way back to the plate. How could I
Is
strike
that
out
all there
about
is?
that? Yeah. Is that all there is?
Right.
And he, when they played in the World Series against the Phillies, he blew a late lead. So, you know, all the guys are around his locker waiting for him and, you know, thinking, oh, man, this might be the first time I see Quiz implode. And, you know, he's got a towel wrapped around him. He's kind of drying his hair. And he goes, guys, I just found out something. You can't drown yourself by putting your mouth over the sprocket in a shower. I mean, he was amazing. There's a book out, Greatest Quotes in the History of Sports.
Uh-huh.
And the only guy who's quoted in there more than Dan is Yogi Berra.
No kidding.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a
We need to
quote
get that
machine.
book.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I'll find out the name of it because it's a great book.
Wow. So
That's fantastic.
let's just keep this thing going. So you've covered a lot of people from middle school, high school that even locally became superstars.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about you kind of bridging that gap of like, okay, there's this middle school kid or there's this high school kid. I'm documenting, I'm writing stories, I'm supporting, I'm getting to know them or their families because I'm around so much. And then all of a sudden, just superstardom.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about a couple of those people in particular.
Well, number one, Albert Pujols.
I knew that. That's what I was looking for.
There
I
we go.
mean, he is the only high school athlete I ever covered that I actually told the Royals, you got to look at this kid. And they sent a scout out to look at him, and they said that they heard he had an attitude.
Okay.
They thought he was 5 years older than he was.
Right.
And I'm talking to Dave Fry, the baseball coach, when Albert played there one time. I said, David, you know, have you ever seen Albert's birth certificate? He goes, never have, don't want to. You know,
Thank
It
you for
doesn't
bringing this
matter,
up because I
right?
mean, this is like kind of the urban legend that people talk about, and so that the fact that we know that Major League Baseball teams were actually having that conversation
Yeah.
is interesting.
It's very interesting because
Well,
the thing is, even if it was off 1 or 2 years, it doesn't matter. You still had to hit a round baseball with a round bat.
Exactly.
Right.
And he had the talent, right? So clearly the Royals didn't look hard enough at him.
Clearly, they were wrong.
They
Bubba
missed.
Sterling should take 50% of everything he makes, according to baseball, and give it to Albert because the Royals weren't going to miss on another
A local kid.
hometown hero.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, everything you hear about him, these urban myths, I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
You know, the home runs over the railroad track at Chrysler Stadium.
Wow.
The home runs on the roof of a high school at a tournament down in Springfield. My phone just blew up one night, and my wife and I were eating, and I didn't answer any of the calls, and then I got him later on, and I looked, and it's like, turn on the TV. And he was on 60 Minutes. And
This is in high school?
No. This was when he was with the Cardinals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they've got a shot over his shoulder, and he's looking at his scrapbook, and he flipped 3 or 4 I wrote every story in there.
Oh, so you're all over it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And, when his first 4 or 5 years, a lot of success in the big leagues, we'd always get together, visit, do interviews and things. And then he just, he was
so
as big
big.
as
He
there
just
was.
blew up. Yeah.
So, and you know what? I didn't want to intrude on his time. I'd always say hi to him. He'd always say hi to me. He still has a great friend in the area, Chris Franca, who played in the infield. Franca was one of the top 5 athletes in the history of Fort Osage High School and was on that state championship team. And my favorite Pujols story, they win a state championship, and I'm there with my son, who was 6. And my son used to take extra quarters to the batting cage when he'd go with his team, just in case Albert was in there. Little batting cage over off of 40 Highway. It's now a carpet place. And he would sit there and punch quarters in so Albert could hit and not have to stop. So they were taking cool. The team to this restaurant in Columbia, and it had this massive grill, and you cooked your own steak. And the kids could get anything they want. So Sean goes off with Chris Frank and Albert Pujols. And I'm doing my interviews. I get there about half hour, 40 minutes later, and I pull in there, and oh man, Chris and Albert look at me, and they've got the cat that ate the canary smile. And I'm like,
what are you up
is
to?
Going on here? Sean's in front of them, Sean is in front of them. They back away, and I think this steak was called the home runners.
Oh gosh,
This big. I mean, like
this is your 6-year-old son.
6-year-old son. And, Albert and Chris have little, I don't know, T-bones or something. And here's my son with a steak that weighs more than
the size of his torso.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like the old 69er.
Yeah.
Yes.
So every time I see Albert, we talk about that.
That's
and,
cool.
To be able to share memories like that with my kids, that's what's fun.
Well, to get to share those special times with those with your kids,
Oh, yeah.
have to be just epic. So we've got Albert Pujols. I know you covered a lot of high school stuff. What about the basketball? Because I remember like when I was coming through, like 6th grade, junior high, Anthony Peeler was huge.
Yeah.
Right.
See, and he'd play down at the Interscholastic Fieldhouse down at 63rd Street. When Peeler was playing, forget it. Get there 2 hours
People would always
early.
come to watch.
Yeah, or you can't get, because it was a big place, but there wasn't a lot of seating.
Okay.
The greatest basketball player, I didn't cover Peeler on a regular basis because he went to Paseo, and I was mainly out in eastern Jackson County. But Tyronn Lue at Raytown High School, he's now the coach for the Clippers, and that blows my mind.
Yeah.
That Raytown team had
Oh my God,
some studs.
Yeah.
Terry Nooner, who went on and played at KU. Groves, I can't remember Groves' first name, but he went and played at K-State. Brandon Weiss was the point guard with Tyronn Lue. And then they had a big guy that all he needed to do was just stand in the paint and just try to be a presence. But that was the rock and roll show, man.
Yeah.
That was the most fun I've ever had. The greatest team I ever covered was the 1990 Raytown South team. Bud Lathrop had the 2 big men, Javon Crudup, who went and played.
That's
at
what I was
Missouri.
thinking of.
Crudup
And then Chris Lindley,
Yep.
who had a dual life. I mean, a straight A student, had a full ride to KU, and he'd go down at nights on the weekends and hop on freight trains, and he fell under one and had his leg severed.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh my God.
You were too
Yeah,
young at that point.
This was 1990.
Yeah, I was still.
I mean, he was going to be the next KU great.
Oh, Roy Williams. This was back before Division I coaches, aren't supposed to come. Roy Williams was there all the time to see him.
Oh yeah.
And he was the man. He was the guy
What was he doing on a train?
that
Just
jumping on trains. They would jump on a train, and then they'd have friends going. They'd hop off, and they'd pick him up 5-10 miles down the road.
God.
Yeah. I haven't thought about this for many, many years, but I was at that time at Truman, I was sitting at the end of the bench on varsity basketball. And I had a front row.
Did Steve Broughton not realize what he had in you?
Clearly
Obviously not.
Wow.
This was Broughton's like first or second year at Truman. Amazing guy, by the way. Love
Great
that guy. And so I had a front row view of them just warming up, and it was literally like men among boys.
Yes, the Twin Towers.
And they
Samson
put on a show.
Like the game was over before it started.
Yeah.
Intimidating.
Yeah, because of that mental
Completely
aspect.
intimidating.
And Javon Crudup is the only high school athlete who has ever intimidated. And not by act, just he always had a scowl.
Yep.
He was huge.
Yep.
And you talk about men among boys. And then Javon said, guys, climb on my back. And they went
rode it.
and won without Lindley.
They kept on going.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Wow.
They kept on going. Bobby, you would have cracked up because they blew out us at Truman so bad. I was sitting out at the end of the bench, and like the last few minutes of fourth quarter, they run all of us in, right?
Yeah.
And both those guys came down. It was a fast break, and I'm in the paint. Both of them are coming down.
Are you like this?
And I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I literally just walked out of the paint and let them jam it. I'm like, nope.
I'm not going to be posterized.
Nope. I'm not going to get humiliated.
Yeah, I'm not going to be on the front page of the Examiner getting lambasted.
No. I'm going to be on the end of the bench next game anyway. It doesn't matter to me.
Oh my gosh!
But it was impressive to see those guys play.
were.
I mean, that was fun. And that was actually one of my questions for you, Bill, is, clearly you've been around a lot of really awesome high school athletes, but maybe talk about some high school coaches. I know you touched base on Broughton, but the coaches that have been around, even the Lathrop, have been at South for decades.
Bud Lathrop was the first coach to ever accept me as this young kid, and he always did his interviews either right after the game or outside the locker room. And he would invite me into his office, and he'd always have a cooler in there with soda and different things. And we just hit it off. And Bud became a great friend. And his career ended in such a tragic fashion. He swatted a kid, and everybody made a big deal out of it.
Right.
But I was called the apologist for Bud Lathrop because I will defend that man. He passed away a few years back. But I went with him one time and did a story with all the kids he took to the dentist. He would fill his big red, everything he had was red because of the Cardinals. He'd fill his Cadillac up with kids and take them to the dentist.
No kidding.
And,
wow.
And
pick up the tab.
And pick kids up. And we're not talking about the all-state superstars. I mean, we're talking about, that kid on the end of the bench that needs to go to the dentist.
Right.
And he was phenomenal. His kids loved him. Two coaches that made the biggest impact on me, him and Kelly Donahoe, the football coach at Blue Springs High School. 20 years, never had a losing season. His first year, they came within an interception of going to state. Rockhurst picked off a pass, ran it for a pick six, and beat them. And I mean, Kelly's, we're talking. I'm like, damn, man, that may be your last chance. He goes, no, we're going to have chances. And, he went to 7 Final Fours and won 3 of them.
That's
impressive. The greatest team, football-wise, I've ever seen was the 2012, 2013 back-to-back years when he won state championship, had the Davis twins who went on and played at Nebraska and then went on, and Khalil was on that Tampa Bay team that won the Super Bowl when they beat the Chiefs here. And then Carlos played with Pittsburgh, and they're no longer in the NFL, but they got to have a cup of coffee.
Right.
Off those 2 teams, though, he had 5 kids that made it to the NFL.
That's amazing for a high school team.
None of them ever.
What year was that? Was
12 and 13.
12 and 13.
Yeah.
I mean, there were kids though that he was coaching in the late 90s that were playing in the NFL.
Oh,
I mean, gosh, Brandon. Receiver Brandon Lloyd.
Oh.
Man, he
led
was
the
a
NFL
stud.
in receptions.
Yeah, he absolutely.
Here's a great Brandon Lloyd story. I'd know Brandon forever. The greatest high jumper I ever saw.
Yeah, he was a freak athlete.
Yeah, when people ask me the best athlete for a boy, it's Brandon Lloyd. Nobody's even in the same zip code. Yeah.
Wow.
I interviewed him. We were good friends in high school. He went on and had a lot of success, and he got this reputation as just being a jerk, and he would not talk to any local media. after games, and he played here twice when he was with Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm over there sitting next to him talking, and all these guys come up and said, "Do you have pictures of him and something? I mean, what is?" And I said, "I've known him forever." And all these guys said, "Look, I'll give you, I'll say who we got the quotes from and everything. We would never have a quote from Brandon Lloyd."
No kidding.
And
Interesting.
very, very interesting guy. And he's now really involved in hip hop and rap.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure to tag him because we're talking about him on the
There you
ABC
go.
show.
Because
Yeah.
didn't he play for the 49ers?
49ers first. I think that's who
yeah.
drafted him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Played for the 49ers. He played for the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
One of the years they didn't win or go to the Super Bowl. And, oh, man, whew.
Yeah,
he's one of those guys that would walk down the hall and you'd say there's a stud.
Yep.
Yeah.
He just had that swag to
He
him.
did.
Yeah. He had that swag.
He fit in so beautifully at Blue Springs High School because Kelly won with class, but man, he liked the guys with
They were
the
gritty.
swag.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. As being a Blue Springs South
Oh yeah,
kid.
Well, now hey, I mean Blue Springs South 3 state championships with Greg Oder.
Yeah, well, that was after my time, but they went on a good run for
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Yeah.
What about this? We talked about some of the guys who were great athletes here in Kansas City and made it, but maybe who was one that just for whatever reason they had all the talent in the world and
a great
it
question.
just didn't happen.
Where you would have bet on them making it.
right?
I would have bet my life, my family's wife, my house, my dogs, that Blaine Dalton would have made it to the NFL. He just,
He was Blue Springs South.
Blue Springs South.
Went to Mizzou.
Went to Mizzou. Was at Mizzou 6 weeks and got kicked off.
Yeah,
team.
that was a really sad
bad.
thing.
And that, people would ask me at the time. They say, "Man, I mean, God, they kick him off after one infraction." He had like 15.
Yeah, this was the big one that everyone knew about.
The prescription drug.
Right.
thing.
Wow.
And grittiest high school athlete I ever saw. He was involved in one of those crazy games where Blue Springs on a Sunday afternoon played Rockhurst on ESPN.
No kidding.
It was like the
Wow.
first or second game of the season, and Rockhurst beat them with a running clock, beat them by 35 points. A lot of guys were hurt. A lot of guys. It was crazy, some of the issues they were dealing with. They get back and play in the first round of the playoffs. And Blaine rushes for a touchdown, throws a couple of touchdowns, and they beat Nathan Shieldhouse, who's now a coach in college and was the previous Simone Award winner. And after getting a running clock on him early in the season, Blaine won the Simone that year.
That's cool.
And
That's
it's just
awesome.
that's the most tragic story. I think he's really turned his life around now. He tweeted me a while back and asked me what was going on, and he knew one of my boys and
That's
asked about
cool.
them. But those 3 years he played at Blue Springs South were amazing.
For sure. So let's another local stud quarterback who recently had some notoriety and obviously on my radar.
My third son.
Okay, let's talk about that. So Mr. Skylar Thompson, third string quarterback
There
for the
we
Miami
go.
Dolphins. Hey, now,
There we go.
Did you hear this? My third son is what he just said. This is a
kid
important guy.
Skinny little guy.
Yeah.
His coach called him the pencil neck geek when he was playing at Fort Osage.
Oh my gosh.
And had the greatest single game in the history of the Big Class Championship football. Rushed for 4 touchdowns, threw for 3, had over, I think, 600 yards total offense just to
word.
himself.
Wow.
And, man, gritty, smart. He was the guy that all the moms wanted their sons to marry and the dads wanted their daughters to date. I mean, he was the guy.
Yeah.
And you would walk out at Fort Osage. Let me rephrase that. Wanted their sons to be like him, not date.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
What
knew
did they-
what you meant. We knew
Okay.
what you meant. Yeah.
Good catch. You like those words were going
Yeah,
in the back of your
I'm like,
head.
wait
You
a
were
minute,
talking at the same
something
time.
happened there?
Well
Wait a
done.
But he would walk down the hallway at Fort Osage High School, and like the theater kids would be visiting with him. He wasn't the cool guy that everybody kind of stayed away from.
He wasn't super arrogant,
No.
unapproachable.
He'd see a kid sitting at a table at lunch by himself and go sit by him.
Man,
That impresses
Class
me as much
act,
as
yeah.
anything Skylar ever did. He would go and at Fort Osage, the elementary school and the middle school are right there on that
Yep.
campus. He would go over there and keep score at little league basketball games and things because he wanted to. And then he goes to K-State and has that litany of injuries, and because of COVID and everything else, is there 6 years and wins the big bowl game in his final game. And I'm just thinking, if somebody takes a chance on him, he could do something. He has the amazing preseason, highest ratings of any quarterback in the preseason.
there were Dolphins fans like screaming for him to be named the
I
starter.
know, and he knew that wasn't going to happen.
No, but it was impressive.
It was very impressive. And then, what he did in that Jets game.
Yeah.
The last time the Jets appeared in the last time the Dolphins appeared in the playoffs, 2016. That's the year Skylar won a state championship at Fort Osage.
That's correct. Well, as we know, it only takes an opportunity for
Exactly.
someone to get in.
Exactly.
And just what he did in a little glimpse last year with the Dolphins
Yes.
can really set him up for several years.
Well, I think, he made a name for himself, and he doesn't want to be Chase McDaniel and hold a clipboard on the
Lifetime
sideline.
backup. Yeah, he wants to.
He wants a chance.
Yeah.
And he loves it down there. Really likes the coach. Said Tua has been great to him, trying to mentor him. Teddy Bridgewater has been outstanding and takes a lot of time away from what he could be doing to help Skylar. And it paid dividends. And I still don't know how they ran out of timeouts at the end of that game when it's 4th and inches.
Oh, man, you're going to give me
I know, man.
some anxiety
I was-
attacks
oh,
here.
We're going to lose Bobby.
I was dying,
Yeah.
30 scores, gets him 31 points, although, one came on a pick 6, but wow.
It's a
was
cool
impressive.
story.
It's a great
And
story.
for anyone that's local that wants to support, have somebody to root for.
Yeah.
Like, he's easy to root for because it's just a great story. And we're looking forward to having him on the show.
Well, yeah, we're
That's
going
gonna
to
be
get
really
him on the
cool.
show.
That'll be
And,
phenomenal.
and his mom, when he was young, died of cancer.
Yeah.
And he had to deal
kidding.
with all that.
Yeah. His dad's pretty big in his life. Like,
his
big
dad
time.
is great. His stepmom's great. And his little brother was our co-defensive player of the year at the Examiner. And he's 5'0" and led the state with 158 tackles.
Dang!
That's
He
crazy.
is
That's
a
awesome.
stud.
That's awesome. He sounds like just like an incredible human being.
Oh, he is.
That's
and,
cool.
and he's going to have a lot of chances coming up.
Oh, he is,
Whether it's, eventually with the Dolphins or somewhere else.
Yep.
As we all know, the quarterback is so important right now.
Absolutely.
So that'll be fun to have him in.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So we want to be respectful of your time, Bill. But as we're kind of wrapping up today, anything that's glaring in your mind that that like people would love to hear about that you said, like we've talked right before the last couple of weeks,
Sure.
and I was like, hey man, come prepped with some stories, and boy, you've dropped some gems. But is there anything in your mind that you're thinking, oh yeah, I want to share this?
Okay, yeah, I got to tell you about the summer of 1975. I'm a student at Northwest Missouri State University, and this is before they found nothing in Capone's vault.
Okay.
When Geraldo Riveira was the hottest guy in the world. Worked at ABC, big-time reporter, had a TV show. He came and was bringing the Zapruder film, the Abraham Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination.
To the university.
To the university. And, all you got to do is watch it. There wasn't just one gunman, especially up in the depository window. It was far away. And
Right.
It was fascinating. Well, he wound up spending the day at my house. And we really hit it off.
Geraldo did?
Yeah. And he invited me to be an intern at ABC that summer.
Oh, you're kidding.
So,
I mean, he was like the man.
Yeah.
he was it. He had just won the, I think it was the Peabody Award. It was some huge award. He went into this god-awful, I can't believe there was a place like this in the United States called Willowbrook. And it was for mentally challenged people, but there were people in there with cerebral palsy. There were people in there that had afflictions that had nothing to do with
Right.
with
It became a
mind.
catch-all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he broke in there one night with a camera crew and filmed people in filth and deplorable conditions. And he he was the only guy I knew in New York who had a car. He had a little Volkswagen Beetle, and he would be driving down the street in that Beetle, and cops on horses would come by and high-five him. I mean, he got me tickets to every Yankee game, every Met game. I saw every Broadway play. But the coolest thing, my hero back then was Kurt Vonnegut, the author.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kurt Vonnegut, his daughter was married to Geraldo.
You're kidding.
Edie Vonnegut. So I spent, Geraldo told me, he says, I can't pay you a salary, but I'll find you a place to live. Well, the place to live was with Geraldo. Edie was out of the country that summer, and he was in a 6-story apartment building that was like 2 blocks from the Dakota. And if I wasn't working, I was standing in front of the Dakota hoping to see John Lennon, but I never did.
Gosh.
But the floors, it's like Woody Allen had a floor in there. Paul Simon had a floor in
Jeez.
there.
Oh my
Geraldo had a floor in there.
The who's
And
who.
To show you how desperate he was for air conditioning, he sent me and his brother out to buy a window unit, and we put it in, and to this day, I don't know how it didn't fall down out of that window and kill somebody.
That duct tape works really well.
Exactly, yeah. Simon and Garfunkel had that huge concert in the park there.
Yeah, Central Park.
Central
Yeah.
Park.
Yeah.
We watched it from Geraldo's balcony.
You're kidding.
I mean,
Wow.
he calls me one day at the office, and he goes, hey, come over tonight. I don't know what you got going on, but cancel it and be over at the house at 6. And I get there about 5:30. The doorbell rings. He says, you want to go get that? And it was Vonnegut.
Wow.
This is your idol, your hero.
I spent an evening with Kurt Vonnegut. And,
How was that?
It was amazing.
I mean,
Yeah.
were you just like on cloud nine?
I'm like 19 years old and wearing my Elton John T-shirt and just, and here I am with Kurt Vonnegut. And that was pretty cool. And we had just gone to Muhammad Ali's training camp in Philadelphia, and Vonnegut was a huge Ali fan. And we just talked about Muhammad Ali all night. And it was awesome, man.
Keep it going, dude. You got that's incredible.
Well,
Wow.
I also slept in Madonna's bedroom.
Okay.
There we go.
So
There
go
we go.
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead
Now,
with that
it
one.
was-
Is this going to be after the show?
It was 4 years before she bought Geraldo's apartment.
Okay.
But where I stayed,
Oh, okay.
Beforehand.
where I lived that year turned out to be, Madonna bought his apartment.
That's
So,
the headline for the podcast.
there you go. Yes.
Bill Althaus sleeps in Madonna's bed.
Hey, I did a
Yes.
speech a while back, and that was the headline. That
I mean,
was
that's the hook.
That's like, what? Okay, I'm
You
going
got
to go
everyone's
listen
attention.
to that.
Everyone's attention.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
What do you got?
Yeah. But this is back, man, before Giuliani. John Lindsay was the mayor.
Yeah.
And, the first night I'm there, Geraldo takes me in a limo.
It's rough.
And he goes, this is where you can go. He said, I'm not calling your mom and dad and saying, hey,
Yeah.
something happened to Bill.
Right.
And you can go here, you can go here. You can never go there. And he had another apartment on Avenue C, which was pretty much, it was a bad area. But once you got inside his apartment, it was unreal. But there's graffiti on the outside. I'm coming out of there one time, and a guy comes up trying to sell me drugs. And this other guy comes across the street. He says, that's Geraldo's boy. Get away from him. Get away. We sorry, man. Don't tell Geraldo. Sorry, man. Just,
Wow.
Wow.
so
You're on the
he-
exclusionary list.
Because he
put the
carried
word
that
out.
much
Yeah,
clout.
Exactly.
Damn.
First time I'd ever been on a plane. First time I'd ever been out of Independence.
Is when he went to New York
Went
to live with
New York.
Geraldo Rivera?
Yeah.
Yeah, way to go all in there, Bill.
Yeah, no kidding. Is that crazy?
No,
I mean,
You didn't dip
this
your
was
toe
before
in.
cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
There was a payphone right outside ABC Studios. We're on Avenue of the Americas, and there was a payphone out there, and I would call my mom and dad, when I left work every day, because I didn't want to ask to use the phones inside. But my gosh, I'd go up in elevators with, the people that were guests on the shows. This giant black guy comes on, and I'm looking at him, and I had no idea who Julius Erving was.
Oh, my
But
gosh.
I later found out. And
Dr.
I mean,
J.
Dr. J. Yeah,
Yeah.
It was.
That you were in the elevator with Dr.
Dr.
J
J. He's
Yeah.
as he's ducking?
Yeah. But when you see someone like that, you're like, Yeah, I
He's
know
somebody.
you do something.
Yeah, he's somebody, but I don't. Well, I presented an award to Dave Winfield in 1980 when he was the player of the
Yes.
year, and we really hit it off and still exchange Christmas cards. I talk to him once or twice a year. He's the only person I've ever been with. We're down on the plaza. He was buying a watch for his wife down on the plaza. We're walking across the street, screeching tires. This guy comes out and says, "Dave, will you sign this dollar bill for me?" And I'm like, I said, "Does that ever happen before?" And he goes,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
"Happens all the time."
Man.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's
amazing.
two episodes in the last 2 weeks where Dave Winfield's been. Was it HUD?
Yeah.
That was speaking really, really highly of Dave Winfield.
He said
as well.
Dave Winfield actually kind of mentored him when he was with the Yankees.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, George and Winfield weren't that close. And
Not that close usually means
Dave was with the Yankees.
sure. I think that's exactly
Hated
what
the-
summarizes
yeah,
that
hated-
relationship.
And back then, those players really didn't like each
Right,
other. It's not like
exactly.
all buddy-buddy.
Exactly.
Right.
So George knew how close I was to Winfield. One time I'm walking in the locker room, the Yankees are in town, and George yells out, "Althaus is in here. Winfield must not be here. His limo must not have brought Winfield here yet,
Throwing shade.
Yeah. So I went and picked up Dave, and we went over, and Leslie fixed lunch. For
At
Dave.
George's house?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, oh, my God, the stories there, Which pitchers did you hate? Which pitchers could you hardly wait to pitch against you? George didn't like Nolan Ryan because Ryan inside. And
Right.
Dave said, "This is how you take care of Mr. Ryan." He hit the first time he hit him. He went out and the famous picture of Ryan and Robin Ventura.
Ventura.
Yeah.
Well, Dave did a version of that on Nolan
Nolan,
Ryan.
really?
So yeah. But it was like 2.5 hours, and I felt like I'd won a contest just listening to these two guys that were friends and that I idolized.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Straight up gold.
It is. Nolan Ryan has probably been referenced on this show more than any other human.
Willie Wilson has some really good stories on Nolan Ryan because you didn't bunt against Nolan Ryan.
Oh no,
He lost his stuff, and he told Willie Wilson about it a couple different times.
Yeah.
He told him about it. Yeah.
When Dennis Leonard was on, did he tell you about Don Baylor?
Maybe.
He hit Don Baylor, and Baylor chased him into the dugout, and he ran up the tunnel into the dressing room.
No.
Yeah.
We talked to Leo a lot. We're going to have to bring that one up.
Leo's, God, I love Dennis Leonard.
He's a gem.
He's a Hall of Famer if he didn't blow out his knee.
Oh, all day
we know.
long.
I mean, 4 years.
Yeah.
He and Steve Carlton were they were just in a class by themselves.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at his numbers, they're unreal.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he was an Iron Man. But,
Oh man.
Well,
We all go in Whitey Herzog's office when he's managing the Royals. He goes, "What are you SOBs doing in here? Go talk to Leo." He just pitched a shutout or some complete game. And one of
like
the guys,
70 complete games that he pitched. Yeah.
And one of the guys said Leo's icing his arm. Whitey pops open a beer and leans back and says, "Can you imagine how many games Cy Young would have won if he'd iced his arm?" And I'm like, "You're dissing the guy that every time he goes out is going to give you 9 innings."
Seriously.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
he was kidding, but that's just one of those comments. I'll never forget that comment.
Man,
Never.
some great stories today, Bill.
Never.
I tell you what, Bill, this has been a lot of fun, and just the experiences and the life that you've had covering something that you love. Not a lot of people get to do that, man.
Yeah.
So kudos to you.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
My wife's put up with me 40 years, and she loves the Comets, so I can finally go back to a sporting event with her, and she knows all their wives and girlfriends, and she'll mingle with them during the game, and it's fun. And one more quick story. I got the greatest event, the greatest moment I've ever had in
Oh,
sports.
okay. Lay it on us.
Yes.
Bottom of the ninth, Game 6, 1985 World Series when Dane Orch got that hit. And they'd been shut out the whole game. Charlie Lee Brandt had pitched to Jim. Mm-hmm. Quiz comes in, pitches the ninth inning, and gets the win rather than Charlie Lee Brandt, which Charlie certainly didn't know about after the game. That's the only time I've ever cried in an event. I was so overcome when Orch got that hit. And I've talked to Jim Sundberg so many times since then. And Jim says, "I kept looking at the dugout. pinch run for me, Dick. Come on, Dick.
Right,
what are you doing?
Right. Get me out of
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
And Andy Van Slyke had led the National League in assists. Just a little floater out there. If it would have been hit any harder.
There's
Sounds
no
like
different
way.
story,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All day.
And that was just phenomenal.
I mean, just that slide.
Oh, I know. The
That's-
slide. Just say the slide.
The slide.
Andy.
Right.
These slide, and then Buddy Biancalana
Oh.
almost clothes hanging, you know.
Buddy, Hauser told me one. He said, I was afraid Buddy was going to make it to the plate before
Yeah.
Sundberg, and then all hell would have broken loose then. So, yeah, those are the things you remember.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what? I think if you're okay with it, maybe we'll set up a 2.0 version of this and bring you in
Oh,
again.
man,
Yes.
this has been so much
Man,
fun.
Bill,
This, like
been a
literally,
blast.
we
didn't even get to the questions we wanted to ask, which is
we haven't even talked about the Hall of Fame.
right. I mean,
Right, so
we're going to do this.
we're gonna
There's
do
going to be a 2.0 and
Yeah.
probably a 3.0 too. So the people are going to ask for it. That's
Oh,
what's
this
going to
is-
happen.
right.
I can't
the
tell
city
you how
is
much
gonna
I
win.
appreciate it. This
Oh,
has been a blast.
It's our pleasure,
Yes.
Bill. Guys, this has been the Always Be Cool with Bill Althaus, and there will be more to come. These are great stories. Make sure to find us where you listen to your podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google, as well as across all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, everything. Mr. Bill Althaus, thank you so much for hanging
Good
out.
job, Bill.
Guys, thank
well
you.
Done.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely,
well done.
guys.
Well done.
All right. Take
See
care.
you guys.
If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode. And for that, Darren and Bobby thank you from the bottom of their hearts.
They hope you enjoyed this new episode. And if you did, please leave them a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Please share this episode with others who may be interested in our community.
Also, feel free to let DC and BK know which business or community leaders you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Get in touch in the comments or on social media. See you next time for a new episode. And remember, always be cool.
This podcast is powered by Summit Lending, NMLS number 1850081, Equal Housing Lender.